Yeah, welcome back to ThinkTech. ThinkTech Tech Talks here with Attila Suresh of SciPack. We're going to talk about staying safe, especially in these difficult times. Welcome to the show, Attila.
Hey Jay, thanks for having me.
So you went to a conference. I need to know about the conference. The conference had a lot of bigwig organizations in there, including NCIS, which we thought only existed on television. But these were real security organizations from all around and to talk about a significant problem. Tell us about the conference and the participants and the problem.
Sure. Every government organization you can think of, every four-letter word or three-letter word, FBI, NCIS, even Coast Guard, Secret Service, all these folks, state obviously, everyone was there to talk about what they're kind of getting everyone in one room and sharing their findings with the public. Now, it was kind of made clear in these presentations that although federal agencies are the ones that are the primary targets of nation state actors and the bad guys out there, it's really becoming obvious that the private sector is becoming about 75% of the attention of these bad guys. It's because they're mostly financially motivated and they want to disrupt our economy here. If you think about it, many federal contractors that are based out of Hawaii supply products and services to federal agencies. And if they can disrupt them, i.e., the supply chain, then they can disrupt the, our department, our defensive capabilities. So, if you kind of think about it from that perspective, you can see where Hawaii might become a prime target for these bad actors. And so, in this conference, they wanted to get everyone together from the federal side and communicate their findings with the private sector, showing them what they're seeing and what we can do about protecting ourselves and thus not becoming a national security risk.
Well, let me talk about motivation. And you mentioned, that seems to be an economic motivation these days. To wit, the Reddit attack, where they are trying to raise money and calling for millions of dollars to release information that they have inappropriately hacked off the Reddit website. Okay, that's clearly a motivation for money. But involved in that, interestingly enough, was a demand that Reddit change its pricing structure. So obviously, the people who were doing this were Reddit members, and they had another agenda. And I find it interesting because we have a mixed message agenda these days. The other thing I noticed in the morning paper was Kansas, the state of Kansas. 100 government employees, government officials, make that in Kansas, in the morning mail, received envelopes with white powder in them. And of course, the authorities checked the white powder and they found out the white powder was nothing, no pathogens involved in the white powder. But reality is they all got the envelopes, so they all got the white powder, which is a threat. And they were all government officials that got the white powder. So you have to look at the question of are they making money? No. Are they intimidating people? I suppose so. I don't know the distribution of Republican versus Democrat recipients of this, but it seems to me that what this reflects is an animosity toward government, right? In the state of Kansas. But then maybe we have an animosity toward the national government too. And maybe that's a motivating feature when these guys are planning bad acts against the national government or us. What do you think? It's not just money, is it?
Well, you've touched on a couple of topics here, so I'm going to kind of put this out there. So you mentioned about data breaches, so breaching information, such as in the Reddit folks. You also talked about the Postal Service. So we could talk about some new developments that are coming out of the Postal Service there. I guess to talk about the first one, which was the threat of ransom for data breaches. So it's no surprise you can go on Bleeping Computer or Google and look up the latest data breaches. And what those entail is that they've either jumped inside of a hospital or they've jumped inside of a distribution network and have been able to then worm their way into organizations extract data from their networks, and then take that data and encrypt it or hold it for ransom or with the threat of release for the public in an effort to make the company look bad, right? And we've seen that time and again. Generally, as the general public or as business owners or as part of Hawaii's general working population, there's not much you can really do about this. It's beyond your control. It's already happened, and usually by the time you've heard about it, they've known for months, and they haven't really publicly disclosed that information. Where there are government agencies involved, they do have an obligation to disclose within a certain period of time. The I believe the Biden administration is now trying to get that time frame down to 4 days. There's that's still in the works, but what they're trying to do is make it so that the public is more aware of something when it occurs after a certain period of time. They don't want to have to depend on whistleblowers, for example, to to have this come across. I will talk about whistleblowers here in a second because I think that that is a valid point. Um, uh, Going back to Move It. So I'm not sure if you've heard of Move It, but it's a service that's commonly used by schools and federal agencies and state departments, all kinds of stuff, and they use it to securely share files and send them, between each other, right? So gone are the days of courier mail or faxing things, right? It all goes through digital platforms. And that platform of it was unfortunately compromised. And the news came out last week. And what that meant was that any agency that was using that to transmit secure documents had that data removed through a 0-day exploit. And that was being held for ransom. And that same attack pattern that I just described, where they take the data, they look at it, they ask for a ransom, and they also demand additional funds for not releasing that data to the general public. And we don't know the exact extent of what that looks like. That I believe that's the Dark Side Gang was the one that was responsible for that, and they were able to take that. That data and post it on their website and try to publicly shame those organizations. So we had everything from, like, I think, University of Georgia to hospitals, various state departments on there. Didn't really look all that good for them, but in the end, I don't believe they're going to pay any of those ransom because there's nothing you can really do about this. They can go ahead and release the data even though the ransom has been paid. So it doesn't really help. Um, Now, back to whistleblowers, because we did talk about that. This is a very interesting thing that did come out of the cybersecurity conference in Manoa. The FBI talked about how whistleblowers were responsible for them cracking down on some companies with bad habits. So, if your company is not enforcing basic cyber hygiene, security measures to protect confidential and secret documents that the federal government is entrusting them with, then a whistleblower can come out and say, "Hey, look, there is an issue here." And in this last particular case of this last whistleblower from earlier this year, they came out, against their employer who was not employing proper cybersecurity practices. The employer was fined $9 million, and the whistleblower got about one third of that, which is about $2.6 million. Of course, I asked if that was taxable. They said it was, but that $2.6 million award was given to a whistleblower for coming out and speaking out against their employer who was not doing the right thing. So I'm glad that they are trying to incentivize this kind of behavior. Of course, I suspect that whistleblower probably didn't work there much longer, but sure.
let me give you a thought about all of that. When you mentioned it, it struck me that there's another possibility for whistleblowing here, and that's someone who knows that a person is hacking. Now, granted, you can hack without anybody looking over your shoulder. Nobody necessarily would know, but sometimes they would. Sometimes it's collaborative effort. As in all human relations, you can't assume the collaboration will continue without some kind of difference of opinion. And so it's possible that one of the collaborators might be a whistleblower, not necessarily against the company who's not taking appropriate steps, but against a fellow who is, the criminal hacker, and he can report that. This sounds like the vigilante thing in Texas, under the abortion laws there, and so it's distasteful, I suppose, in some ways. But at the same time, it seems to me that if you said to a whistleblower who would report somebody he knew was hacking and engaging in these activities, you said you're going to give him 10,000 or 100,000 or $1 million for his report, assuming you catch the person based on his information, that might incentivize a lot of people. And it might really be a way to take a whack at these guys. Because right now, I'm throwing this at you. We don't have a lot of prosecutions. We don't have a lot of people going to jail, which they should be. We don't really catch them. But if we had whistleblowers, we would catch at least some of them, don't you think?
Yeah, the big frustration that I heard at this conference, and I've heard this for even outside this conference, is that many law enforcement agencies are able to find evidence of compromise well ahead of of an attack. So there's something called data access brokers. The access brokers will then gain entry inside of a network. Let's say it's a bank or a hospital, and then they're done. Then they sell that access to the next guy. And at that point, the Secret Service, FBI, Homeland Security, they're alerted that a critical infrastructure company or a company that's doing business with the federal government has been compromised. They contact them, and nothing is done. So the whistleblowers at that point can actually do something and say, like, look, we've been we've been notified that there's an issue here, or they just see in their company in general that the company is not enforcing basic cyber hygiene, following poor practices, and they're responsible for human lives or for a national security project. And at that point, if they do speak up, they are compensated. In terms of hacking, you said something important, which was, you're worried about, one bad guy perhaps being double crossed by another bad guy, and that's absolutely correct. Bad guys do business with other bad guys, and if they collaborate and they cross each other, no surprise, right? They're not honest people. And so those kind of collaboration efforts often do fall apart. And the idea that no one is watching is really not true. Perfect illustration of that is Bitcoin. Everyone thought that it was this anonymous, untraceable currency. Well, that's not the case. Public ledgers are out there, and with those crypto wallets becoming more and more public, they are able to trace and cross correlate the money, so they can see that maybe someone purchased website services through crypto, but then they also stole or did human trafficking or sold drugs to that same wallet, right? So you can cross correlate things like that, and then put together a picture or a profile of who this bad guy is.
So let's assume that one bad guy goes to the FBI and says, "Look, I was collaborating. I want to turn myself in, but I also want to report my collaborator." And the FBI says, "Yeah, we want that." So the FBI now has a witness, and maybe it snoops over what's happening, and it develops a case, and it prosecutes, and it convicts, and it puts the fellow in jail. I mean, we're talking about, I don't know if it's a felony, but it should be felony criminal activity. And so at that point, now it's worthy of getting into the press, because if it's in the press, it's going to discourage other people from engaging in the same kind of conduct. So I can see that happening in a U.S. scenario. What I cannot see happening is in a scenario in Bulgaria, where the FBI has precious little resource or influence. But the question is, I suppose, has it happened? And do you agree with me that a public spectacular over the trial and the punishment would help discourage others?
To a degree, I mean, I can only speak to the way that I've seen it played out in the past, and that usually involves informants. So in the cyber world, it's like you said, it is a bit of an ecosystem. So if you find one critical person there, so one sort of person of distribution, and then hop into and then arrest them and offer them the option for them to become an informant, then they'll generally find a lot more people involved in that kind of syndicate. And like you described, they can coordinate with local law enforcement to take everyone down at the same time. And so we've seen that over and over again on dark web marketplaces. We've seen that on informants where it comes to human trafficking, drug trafficking, that kind of thing. So the informant route is the better way to go. Um, and yes, perhaps making a public spectacular out of it might disincentivize maybe some would-be bad guys to getting into this arena. But I can promise you now that there's a lot of money involved here. They're well-funded. They're smart people. They're abroad. They have more time, energy, and resources than often many of the companies that are trying to defend themselves against this kind of problem. And so all we can really talk about is, what kind of best practices and good behavior can you insert into your own organization. And that's why, in my blog article on the Deep Watch, I try to center in on just the one thing. Like, what is the one big good takeaway that a company can do that's cheap, free, easy? Well, not so easy, but at least free.
What's the idea? Two-step authentication, right?
You said it, Jay. So I've seen this before. So this is a post-it pad that I'm holding up, and this post-it pad has a password 123, and then it's stuck on a monitor, right? And that is very poor security. And so even if your password is 123, there is a way to protect your account, and that's using two-factor authentication. And that's that thing that annoys everyone where it either text messages your phone or you're required to punch in a six-digit code that's on an app on your phone in order to proceed to access your email, your accounts, your payroll, your money, whatever, right? And that that single step can eliminate the need for a lot of complex passwords. I'm not saying it's perfect. There are ways around two-step authentication. There's a lot of tricksters. We did talk about that at the event. Um, but in general, it cuts out about 99% of bad actors from being able to compromise an account. Every week, we get several companies who come to us. They've been compromised. Recently, we did a release with how the new Nigerian scammers are able to access accounts, and they are able to access them because many folks don't have two-factor authentication turned on, and they're either using a password that's simple, such as password 123 on my post-it, or they are using a password that's been reused. So it's been breached from another website, such as LinkedIn or any number of shopping websites. And that same password, username, and password combination is used for their actual work email. The bad guys from Nigeria get in there, they start soliciting their client list, and it's a massive mess after that. It becomes a massive cleanup project, and it can very easily damage the reputation of a company, depending on who it is, and even put them out of business. We've seen this happen firsthand.
Yeah,
And so
those
that's why.
guys in Nigeria are very smart guys. You can't underestimate them. And they have schools in Nigeria. And the other thing about it is they work in teams. It's not just one guy, doing the stuff. It's a bunch of guys, and that leads me to one thing I wanted to ask you is, you know, isn't this easier to catch by virtue of the informant methodology? Because now the technology is so sophisticated that there's a team play for these hacking experiences. In other words, it's not just one person in the basement all by himself, never talks to anybody. It's more likely these days, as it is in Nigeria, to be a team play, and therefore it's more possible to break down one of the team members.
Well, it could be. This is not something that's a set in stone type of business model. There's new things happening all the time. So, for instance, with the Nigerian scammers, this attack method of compromising folks' email accounts and then requesting that they fill out some information to their clients and making it look very legitimate. That's only been out for a couple of months, and now we're starting to see job applications. So even here, because we're a cybersecurity company, always looking for good people, we did put out some job applications, and guess who applied? Some folks from Nigeria.
Ooh.
Yeah. So imagine if they were to access our infrastructure and what would happen there. So we've seen this attack pattern though before, but it was from North Korea. So
One other thing you mentioned, Phil, is that the two-factor authentication, it requires a phone, and that's what most people, are troubled by. They got to go get their phone. They got to have a phone with them. If they don't have a phone, they can't do it, and so forth. Now, I suppose two-step authentication also includes email, where you can have the email on the same machine that you need the two-factor authentication. But one thing strikes me is on your phone, you can achieve authentication if you put your finger on a fingerprint device, a fingerprint software.
Biometric, yeah.
Yeah, biometric, and that's great. But why don't we simply have a USB device that attaches to the computer itself, and you put your thumb down on that and achieve the same thing without having to run into another room or another office and get your phone?
Well, the good news about multi-factor is that there's lots of new technology and lots of cheap ways to do this, and some more expensive ways and more commercial ways. In the military, they use something called CAT cards. It's an RFID card. That's their method of two-factor. They are also moving to Windows Hello, which is the biometric facial recognition. It uses two cameras to do both like a night vision and a heat map of your face to make sure that you are who you are, that you're not just holding up a picture. There are USB devices such as YubiKey, where you can plug that in, and then that has the authentication method on there. That can be your two-factor method. The only reason I bring up the phone is because it's the one that everyone seems to have. Everyone seems to have a smartphone, and if they don't, there are ways where it can call the phone, and you can type in a code that it speaks to you, via audio. So in some businesses where we roll out two-factor, they have office phones, and it can call the office phone that's sitting there on that person's desk. They pick up, they enter in the two-factor code, and off they go. So there's lots of ways to do this, but um, the one kind of danger here is that there is resistance from the at the very top. So those who are the decision makers, so the C-level folks, they're not the ones that are doing the two-factor, and they are the ones who are most at risk.
Mm.
So in the cases that we've worked on recently, where hundreds of thousands of dollars have been stolen, it's all been from compromised accounts at the very highest level. And that kind of communication occurs from the highest level down. And when the boss says, "Wire this money out for $150,000 or $200,000," then there's everyone who's a subordinate, they oblige, and they don't know that that could be coming from a bad guy. So those top cyber hygiene habits, so good security awareness training, two-factor authentication, that all needs to come from that behavior needs to be installed at the very top. And I promise you this, it's very interesting what we've seen over the past few weeks. um, Perfect English. In the past, we used to see some broken English or something weird or some tells, like they would say like regards, comma, then the boss's name. We don't see that anymore. It's because they've used AI, right? So Chat GPT or Bing or any number of others out there, and they've been able to craft these emails in real time to sound very legitimate.
Mm.
And we see it firsthand how they're communicating in real time with clients saying, yes, this is legitimate. Click the link. Thanks for replying. Like that kind of conversational tone that you would see normally from a human being, it's in these emails now, very fast, and it's very reputable.
Tell me more about the conference. I mean, you indicated that there was something coming down the pike. Can you talk about that? What were they addressing?
Well, one thing about the government is that they have secrets, and certain secrets they won't tell us. But the sense I got was that they saw a huge push towards attacking the private sector. And that prompted them to put the conference on in the first place because they want to communicate with the private sector more than ever before. In fact, our FBI contact there did mention that in his over 20 years now with the FBI, he's never seen this much communication between government and private sector. It's because they do want to get the word out. They do want to help people. They don't want our critical infrastructure to become compromised due to supply chain issues from those in the private sector. That's their partners, right? They don't want to see our businesses destroyed because of this. And There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of theft going on. Yeah, I know we talked about post office earlier, but there's some stuff going on at the post office. It's infiltrating on every level, and it's up to the private sector, us, right, to protect ourselves from what we know is coming.
There's a couple of things just to throw in the pot and see whether this was discussed. Number one is there have been Chinese ships, high tech ships, not far from Hawaii, and we've spotted them, and they were in the newspaper, and very interesting. What are they doing out there? The second thing was 60 Minutes last weekend had a story about Taiwan and the Chinese attempt to what do you want to call it, undermine the business in Taiwan, private sector. And the fellow who was, I guess he was a public official, he said he said they have cyber attacks. Ready for this? Are you sitting down? Are you sitting down? Um, by the hundreds of millions every day.